I'm just going to come and stand a little closer and bring my Bible with me. We're talking today about the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do to you. This is one of the things that, one of the truths that we find in many, many religions around the world. Every religion seems to have some form of the golden rule. Now there are, I've learned, several different forms of the golden rule. There's first of all the negative version, and we see it recorded in Judaism. The well-known rabbi who was a contemporary of Jesus, Hillel, said this: "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah, all the rest is commentary." So that's the negative version, do not do to others. Then there's the positive version that we're much more familiar with, which is the version that Jesus said, and it's recorded in Matthew's Gospel, in the Sermon on the Mount, and in Luke's Gospel, in the Sermon on the Plain. In the Matthew's version is, "In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets." Very similar in many ways to Hillel's version, but the positive version. You go and do these things rather than do not do them. And then there's a third version called the empathic form. And this is found in Islam, among others. "Not one of you truly believes unless you wish for others what you wish for yourselves." So not so much about doing or not doing, it's about what you wish for others. Now, one of the things we have to understand when we talk about Jesus' version, and as we find it in the Word, in the Gospels, we have to understand it in the context of an eye for an eye. It's a rule known as lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. In other words, what you give out is what comes back to you. So it's found in the eye for an eye rule, which as it's expressed, in the Old Testament, it's a limitation on revenge. So an eye for an eye, or the law of retaliation, is the principle that a person who has injured another person is to be penalized to a similar degree. The intent behind the principle was to restrict compensation to the value of the loss. In other words, if you are taking some form of revenge or retaliation, you are not to exceed the value of the damage that was originally done. There's that limitation that's there. Of course, Jesus talks about it in other ways, and he talks about the value of forgiveness. But we need to understand the golden rule in the context of this law of retaliation. So what you give out is what you receive, an eye for an eye. Other ways that Jesus talks about this is, "Judge not, that you be not judged. What you give is what you will receive." And at his arrest, he talks to Peter and he says, "Those who live by the sword die by the sword." This is the law of retaliation. From Swedenborg, I can mention the same sort of principle. From Secrets of Heaven, he writes this: "Those who are moved from the heart to do good receive good from others. And also conversely, those who are moved from the heart to do evil receive evil from others. So it is that all good has its reward attached to it, and all evil its punishment." Now, there's a couple of important things we need to bear in mind when we read the golden rule: do to others as you would have them do to you. Nowhere is it written in reverse. In other words, it does not say, expect others to treat you as you would treat them. This is not about the way you expect others to act to you. This is about the way you act towards others, irrespective of the way that they act towards you. And that's the other thing to remember. It is not conditional. It's not a I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine sort of an arrangement. It is simply the way you are intended to act, irrespective of the way that others act. And so in Luke's gospel, as we've heard already this morning, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. So what's the reason that we carry out the golden rule? Why are we to do to others as we would have them do to us? Well, it's because of the nature of God. If we read further through the Luke's gospel as we heard it this morning, it says this, "But love your enemies, do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be the sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the unthankful and evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful." And that's the reason why we do the golden rule, not because of the way others treat us, but because we ourselves wish to be identified as sons of God. We are emulating the way Jesus acts and would have us act. So all of that really kind of is wrapped up in that passage that we've read. But what I said my talk was about today was the problem with the golden rule, and I wonder if you notice what it is. Doing to others what you would have them do to you works to a point. I'd love to be able to show you a little slide that I have seen on Facebook, and I saw it many months ago now. It talks about the way introverts and extroverts view the world and the way that they interact with other people. So the way that an introvert and an extrovert labels being polite. So an extrovert will say something like, "Sure, I'll come in and I'll chat for a bit. You're worth my time." Whereas an introvert will say, "I'd better get going. I know how busy you are and I don't want to inconvenience you." You see, both people want the best for the person that they're talking to, but to an invitation in to talk, they will react in entirely different ways for different reasons. The extrovert will say, "I'd love to stay for dinner. If I say no, I'd be insulting your cooking." Whereas the introvert will say, "Oh, I couldn't possibly. You weren't expecting me, so there would be less food for your family." Two entirely different ways of seeing the world and reacting to people. The extrovert will say, "It's nice to meet you. Tell me about your family, your job, your hobbies. I'm interested in getting to know you." Whereas the introvert will say, "It's nice to meet you. I won't ask any personal questions because I would seem like I'm prying." The extrovert will say, "I know you've had a stressful day, so I'm calling to check on you." The introvert will say, "I know you've had a stressful day, so I'm going to give you some space." You see, so in each of these ways, the introvert and the extrovert, they are doing to others as they would have others do to them. And yet, if it's looked at from the other side, the introvert can seem cold, can seem uncaring. The extrovert can seem nosy and pushy and difficult. Do you see the difference and the contradiction? And do you see the problem with the golden rule? Another book that I'm aware of that I came to know of many years ago now is called The 5 Love Languages. And it talks about those love languages of being affirmation, time, gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And the author, Gary Chapman, talks about the way that we each have a major love language. And those are the things that we tend to crave. They're the things that we want as expressions of love, but they are also the way that we express our love to others. And so the thrust of this book is to just say, well, understand that we have different love languages from one another, and often our wires get crossed because, say, for example, my way of expressing love is to give of my time. But your way of expressing love is acts of service. So when I give of my time as my expression of love to you, you don't understand it as love because you treasure acts of service. And acts of service are the thing that express love to you. And vice versa. Your acts of service might be totally missed by me because I'm looking for and craving for time. So there's a TED talk I came across only in the last couple of days by a gentleman called Brendan Schultz. And he says that we need to rewrite the golden rule. He suggests it should be do unto others as they would have you do to them. Hugh Mackay, in his book, The Good Life, he asks, what is their deepest desire? He talks very much about the golden rule and the application of the golden rule. And he talks about what he calls the 3 great therapies of everyday life. And they are to listen attentively, to apologize sincerely, and to forgive generously. Swedenborg writes this: feeling the joy of someone else as joy within ourselves, that is loving. Feeling our joy in others, though, and not theirs in ourselves, is not loving. That is loving ourselves, while the former is loving our neighbor. Do you understand the distinction that he's making here? If I want to love somebody, I need to find joy in their finding joy, whatever source that joy comes from. It may be something that I don't myself enjoy, but to really love them, I need to enjoy the fact that they are finding that. Whereas if I have something that I enjoy and I expect someone else to find the same joy in it, who am I really loving? I'm loving myself. I'm loving myself through them. I'm expecting them to come on board with me rather than me being prepared to come on board with them. The Apostle Paul, in 2 different places, in Romans chapter 12, writes this: be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another. And in 1 Corinthians, he writes, let no one seek his own, but each other. Let no one seek his own, but each one the other's well-being. So what I'm suggesting to you with the golden rule today is, in order to practice it properly, in order actually to carry out the golden rule, to do unto others as I would have them do to me, I must go beyond a very literal translation or understanding of that. I must go to what it is the other person loves. That must be my point of reference. So then I'll ask you one more question. Why is it that the word is written in that way, if it's limited in that way? Why is the word written like that? Well, it's written like that because the word is for each of us in whatever state it is that we find ourselves in. So we might be in a very self-centered and a selfish state, and the word speaks to us in that state. It speaks to us in our being self-consumed and says, love others, love others. And then, of course, it's calling us out of that state into something deeper, something more heavenly. I've got a lovely book in my library by William Bruce, who is a New Church commentator. And he writes on Matthew's Gospel, on the Golden Rule, he writes this: the celestial or heavenly principle prompts man to love others better than themselves. The spiritual principle prompts them to love others as themselves. The principle which our Lord lays down is to be considered in connection with what the Lord has just said, that men, being evil, know how to give good gifts to their children. The law which he now lays down is for the natural man as well as for the spiritual. It appeals not only to every man's sense of right, but to his self-love. So our challenge for the week is, can we allow the word to speak to us in a deeper way, to call us out of our normal reaction to things to a higher and a better way of living? Can we be called truly Christians, that is, followers of Christ? And I'll show you two more passages from John's Gospel just to finish off this morning. For if I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. And then a little later on, also from John's Gospel, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends.